Our next speaker is Clancy Cavnar. Clancy Cavnar has a doctorate in clinical psychology from John F. Kennedy University in Pleasant Hill, California. She currently works in private practice in San Francisco and is an associate director at Chacruna. She is also a research associate of the Interdisciplinary Group for Psychoactive Studies. She combines an eclectic array of interests and activities as a, this lighting. She combines an eclectic array of interests and activities as a clinical psychologist, artist, and researcher. She has a Master's of Fine Arts in Painting from San Francisco Art Institute, a Master's in Counseling from San Francisco State University, and she completed the Certificate in Psychedelic Assisted Psychotherapy program at the California Institute for Integral Studies. She is the author and co-author of articles in several peer-reviewed journals and co-editor with Vialabache of 8 books. Clancy Cavnar.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you, Chacruna and Bia for organizing this. I appreciate all the work that went into it since I watched it happen. Okay, I'm just going to begin. I'm actually going to read, unlike the other more charismatic speakers, but this is how I'm going to get your information into your brain. The latest psychedelic resurgence has raised all boats in the sea of consciousness, including those of our sexually and gender diverse or queer brothers and sisters. How does this special group benefit from these substances? In my dissertation on the effect ayahuasca had on gay and lesbian people's perception of their identity, I found all respondents to my survey received affirming messages in their visions and had positive reflections on their sexual orientation. This discovery leads to the hypothesis that traumatized sexual minorities may find healing from societal rejection through psychedelic experience. The external relationship of queers to dominant culture has allowed this population to develop its own counterculture with its own relationship to drugs. Because queer culture has been pushed underground, just as Eric Davis was saying prior to me, other activities that flourished away from the eyes of dominant culture also flourished within it, including drug use, particularly psychedelics, which played an important role in establishing group identity. A history exists of queer people using psychedelics to heal and explore. Ayahuasca, the substance with which I am most familiar, has the apparent ability to resolve trauma and enhance self-esteem. The powerful experience provided by ayahuasca permits examination of identity and the evolution of the concept of self. Cultural forces are integrated, rejected, or reinterpreted in the process of identity transformation, and visions and insights form and reconfigure general and sexual identities. Both trauma and self-esteem are issues relevant to the queer community. Here, I will explore some of the ways queer people have been impacted by their identity, and then factors that help designate ayahuasca in particular as a tool in healing from cultural oppression. The potential of psychedelics to treat trauma is especially relevant to queers because, due to religious discrimination, they are among the most persecuted groups worldwide. Members of this group may be cast out of their own homes and families when they reveal their orientation, unlike most other minorities who experience solidarity in their homes. Queer people are often told that part of their essential identity is flawed or sinful, and such perceptions can lead to personal crises that can result in self-destructive behavior, including addictions, depression, and suicide. Identity has various ways of expressing itself, both in public and private. Social, public identities and private, personal identities interact in gay individuals in strategic ways to avoid or invite conflict with the dominant culture. This has resulted in both a vibrant subculture and a high suicide and substance abuse rate. Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish traditions all forbid homosexuality, although there are organized groups of gays and lesbians who are members of all these denominations. The political force known as the Christian right, a religious conservative voting bloc, has been responsible for legislation expressly designed to limit the participation of gays and lesbians in public life by preventing marriages, keeping gays and lesbians from being teachers, and preventing gays and lesbians from adopting children. Queers are barred from full participation in secular life based on conservative religious doctrine. Trans people are murdered at an alarming rate. One can also find homophobia among healers and healing centers that use the power of psychedelics to further reinforce cultural oppression. Efforts to convert gays to heterosexuality in the context of the ayahuasca religions point to the other side of the psychedelic coin, and attempts in the first psychedelic wave of the 60s to use plant medicines and LSD to change sexual orientation, along with the existence of such entities as MK Ultra, run by the CIA, show that psychedelics can be hijacked to serve the interests of less than enlightened causes. A history of psychedelics being used to facilitate conversion therapy in gay people can be found, starting in the 60s, that includes masters in Houston administering mescaline to gay men in hopes of changing their orientation, believing the psychedelic made the subjects more masculine, with deeper voices and improved posture. Stanislav Grof gave gay men LSD to treat their homosexuality, and in 1969, Richard Alpert, known as Ram Dass, reported partial success after giving LSD to a bisexual man and presenting him with a woman to have sex with while tripping to try to change his orientation. It was rumored that that was actually Richard Alpert, but I wrote and asked, and they said it wasn't him, so. In 1962, Joyce Martin gave small doses of LSD to 12 homosexual subjects to change their sexual orientation, claiming this treatment worked for 7 of them on a 6-year follow-up, with 1 slight relapse. Stanford and Golightly, early psychedelic researchers, reported in 1967 that homosexual issues were often resolved using psychedelic therapy, and that homosexuals would either be at peace with their orientation after LSD therapy or decide that they were heterosexual. These published reports represent only some of the work done during the era to use psychedelics to change sexual orientation, as not every treatment or session became part of a study. Since homosexuality was removed in 1987 from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is used to diagnose mental health disorders, attempts to change sexual orientation have been limited to certain Christian-based centers and providers who use various forms of non-psychedelic coercion in discredited therapies that have little chance of changing sexual orientation. Until recently, gay people have had to hide their identities, fostering secrecy linked with complicity. Queers have always known that the hypocrisies of the straight world, of religions that preach love and encourage hate, and of the powerful people who work against them in public while denying secret sexual relations with them. This lack of compassion and desertion of our brothers and sisters exists because of ignorance, and psychedelics are teachers that can provide transformative knowledge. Ayahuasca is one of the plant medicines that is starting to show on the radar of popular culture. It is a psychoactive brew made most commonly from a combination of an Amazonian vine, Banisteriopsis caapi, and the leaves of a bush, Psychotria viridis. It has a history of inciting religious and spiritual insight in those who drink it. The use of ayahuasca for personal exploration, physical and emotional healing, and religious practice has grown recently, both in the United States and worldwide, expanding from its traditional roots in South America to become a global phenomenon. Currently, an estimated 30,000 people drink ayahuasca throughout the world, either as ayahuasca tourists in South America, with traveling shamans in their own countries, or as adherents of the 2 international ayahuasca churches, Santo Daime and União de Vegetal, and their numerous offshoots and variations. Ayahuasca is usually consumed safely, and there is no risk of overdose. However, cases have been reported of different plants being added to the admixture, such as tobacco or toé, or a lack of supervision of intoxicated participants has led to injuries or deaths. Originally used by indigenous people in the Amazon for hunting, healing, sorcery, divination, and communication with the spirit world, it is said to heal physical and psychological wounds and to inspire religious and spiritual visions. The experiences of people who drink ayahuasca are often life-changing, with many reporting cures for addiction and depression, as well as a variety of physical illnesses. How does ayahuasca impact self-esteem? I propose that it is through the basic function of identity. In my research, in which I interviewed 17 gay and lesbian North Americans and Europeans who had drunk ayahuasca in group settings, I focused on identity as a fundamental factor accounting for changes in behavior after experiences with ayahuasca. Psychotherapy and psychedelics both assist in helping redefine identity. Psychotherapy focuses on ego defenses and issues stemming from identification with the ego and its journey to wholeness, while ayahuasca can loosen the strict boundaries of self-perception and allow other information and perspectives in, introducing a new dimension of healing. The teachings of ayahuasca are distinctive to the life and understanding of each drinker. It is commonly reported that ayahuasca drinkers feel they have experienced years of therapy in a single night. Desires and pain that are unacknowledged are represented in images and presented in a way that the observing ego can appreciate. Such realizations can unleash torrents of emotion that wash away blockages and limits. Physical purging by vomiting or defecating also plays a part in opening up the body and mind, so the limitations caused by trauma can be eroded and expelled. One gay man who participated in my research talked about being inspired by his ayahuasca experiences to come out to his friends about his sexual orientation, saying, "After drinking ayahuasca, I started sharing with some close friends about my sexual orientation, and that was the power, that I could have this experience, that I could go deep into the plant, and she could open my heart and my fears and allow me to come to a sort of resolution, a look at myself in such a way that I then went out into the world and made real hard changes in my life." Another participant described gay angels who took him to heaven to be healed from the wounds he had that were caused by homophobia. The messages from the plants directly address the places where wounds exist, which, for queer people, are often the damage caused by homophobia and rejection. In indigenous communities that use it, ayahuasca often appears in origin myths, defining the group and how they, as an ethnic group or tribe, first appeared. Anthropologists have sought to follow the way ayahuasca spread and was adopted by various indigenous groups, noting its dispersion through meetings of tribes in exchange of songs, stories, and medicines at gatherings and along river routes used by indigenous people as well as missionaries. Where it spreads, it often becomes central to the identities of the groups who use it, even when it is more recently incorporated into use. Modern ayahuasca use in the North is defined by ayahuasca church groups' identities, as well as lineages descending from indigenous shamans who have initiated Westerners into their ayahuasca practice in the manner of Hindu and Buddhist teacher lineages. Westerners who assume the identity of ayahuasca shamans in an indigenous format are also influenced by the drink to expand their personal identities, becoming healers or spiritual leaders in their North American or in European environments, singing ikaras in the languages of their teachers and practicing dietas of other plants to sharpen their perceptions and heal their own psychological and physical wounds. For some queer people, escaping from Western modes of thought and judgmental Middle Eastern spirituality into Amerindian indigenous worldviews, however imperfectly understood, is a great relief. Ayahuasca's relationship to identity can also be observed in the phenomenon reported by both shamans and ayahuasca explorers, that of being in two places at once, or being two different beings at once. For example, a shaman may be sitting in front of her client and also traveling in the Milky Way as a jaguar at the same time. A daimista may be dancing and having an experience of speaking with celestial beings at the same time, and so forth. Benny Shannon discusses the issue of identity in his opus, The Antipodes of Mind, saying, "In the Amerindian context of ayahuasca, the ability to maintain a double identity is regarded as a key characteristic of a competent shaman. Shamanistic flight is not just having an illusion that one's identity and location have changed. Rather, the experience consists of being in two realms, being oneself and at the same time being someone or something else. The shaman is here and at the same time he is there, up in the sky or in the heavens. Phenomenologically, it is a fact that with ayahuasca, as well as in other non-ordinary states of consciousness, human beings feel that they are being connected to or integrated within some sort of super consciousness." Changes in identity occur under the influence of ayahuasca in cases of the perception of being another person, transforming into an animal or into plants or stones, changes to the texture or substance of one's body, flying, being in two places at once, and seeing what it is to die. It is worth noting that queers have spent centuries disguising their identities, being two people at once, and shifting identities as needed in safe and unsafe spaces. Two-spirit people of the Native American tribes also are said to embody the identities of both sexes. The boundaries of the body and space cease to apply in the experience of many, and drinkers may also go back in time to early trauma or earlier events to view them from another perspective, and even travel to previous lives or report experiences from their future. The original name given to the harmine in the ayahuasca vine was telepathine, and users have reported various instances of psychic abilities while under its influence. Ayahuasca is also known to increase suggestibility. Ayahuasca's ability to lift the mood is likely related to its serotonergic effects, but I propose that it may also be due to its effect on the ego and the phenomenon of grasping, which in Buddhist philosophy is the cause of suffering. Minimizing the desperation of the ego is related to feelings of peace, and at its core, ego is the basis for our common notions of identity. Therefore, changes in the ego result in changes to identity, and ayahuasca is known to promote changes to identity in the individuals who consume it. These changes are usually perceived as healing experiences, and the new identities adopted to be preferred states of navigating life. While rarely, if ever in the West, changing someone's identity from gay to straight, the reframing around issues of love and worth in the ayahuasca experience is the healing mechanism that allows queers to embrace their own queer identity. An underlying premise of many trauma therapies posits that the perseverance of trauma is the result of feelings not being fully processed. Ayahuasca gives an opportunity to feel long repressed negative states that may result in trauma resolution. The catharsis of these states allows room for spiritual growth, freeing energy that was used to keep the malfunctioning emotional system in place. The capacity of ayahuasca to heal trauma is related to its ability to permeate the layers of consciousness, past ordinary thoughts to the subconscious where repressed memories dwell, and even down to the soul, that place in each person that connects with the universal, unbound by time and flesh. Accessing this part of the human construct allows healing insights of a transpersonal nature, and experiencing it brings peace and acceptance that tends to wash away the tangled neurosis that form in response to trauma and everyday stressors. Ayahuasca's use in treating trauma is one valuable use of this medicine, but beyond that, this substance provides even well-adjusted individuals with enhanced peacefulness, satisfaction with life, and spiritual nourishment. Qualities that have been reported as effects of ayahuasca, as seen in the literature, include assertiveness, joy of life and liveliness, and less signs of anxiety, with drinkers being more optimistic, self-confident, and emotionally mature. Effects of enhanced mindfulness, personal empowerment, hopefulness, improvements in quality of life, increased subjective feelings of connection with spirit, nature, self, and others, increased insight, the ability to reframe cognitive structures, enhancement of trust and social feelings, and development of a richer, more joyous life. Drinkers reported letting go of negativity, being less cynical, feeling more genuine, feeling more acceptance of themselves, increasing confidence and calmness, feelings of compassion, generosity, and humility, recognizing the importance of love, feeling a responsibility to others, an emphasis on simplicity, not harboring bad thoughts about others, and gratitude. Some said ayahuasca helped them make sense out of their lives. Many people reported spiritual experiences where they became aware of their true selves or witnessed their personal power in its limitless form. Beyond overcoming the pathologization of homosexuality, the promise of happiness, insight, and connection can remain a motivation for exploring with ayahuasca. In my research on gay ayahuasca users, where I asked questions directly about identities, several participants said they had discovered their calling as healers or that they had a mission on earth, often connected to ayahuasca. I have observed this phenomenon also in other circumstances since then. In fact, I am also a person for whom this is true, and I devote my free time to promoting the responsible use of ayahuasca, as I feel indebted to the drink for all it has shown me in my own life and protective of its reputation. Besides the commitment to the drink itself, new understandings of nature and interdependency arise as the boundaries of the ego shift to include more elements of the ecosystem on which it depends. This can inspire a love for nature and conserving the forests and waterways. Ayahuasca's effect on interpersonal relationships is also notable. Poor interpersonal relationships often characterize drug addicts and depressed people, a tendency to isolate and withdraw into a cushion of artificial endorphins or the darkness of despair. Working again on the boundaries of the ego, feelings of gratitude for others in one's life, feelings of love and connection, and experiences of compassion for humanity and increasing solidarity with it are often reported in ayahuasca accounts. The patterns of interdependency become apparent here, too, in various ways to ayahuasca drinkers, and previously obscured connections of all kinds are observable. In many cases, these insights have the power to affect the personal relationships of drinkers, having the positive effect of enhancing interpersonal connection and honesty, resulting in greater feelings of support and care. In my research, participants noted that they also tended to allow toxic relationships to wither, creating a safe environment for healthy personal ties based on trust and compassion. Queer people are empowered by their ayahuasca experiences to deeper and more honest connections in their lives. Shifts in identity are powerful agents of change. The shift in self-conception from victim to victor can be a decisive factor in the journey of life. Ayahuasca makes drinkers aware of deeper levels of the psyche, and based on that knowledge, people can alter their perceptions of themselves, resulting in changes to their identity. Who we are before we drink is never who we are after. This is something more or less believed by most ayahuasca enthusiasts. Drinking ayahuasca can reveal the disguises that we have unknowingly assumed and took to be ourselves. Our conception of ourselves determines how we interact with the world. For queer people, revealing the person remaining after shedding the costume of a defective outcast can be a healing discovery. The revolution comes when each understands their own value, thereby recognizing the value of others. The benefits of awakening to our intrinsic worth, be it through psychedelics, meditation, or spiritual practice, is to feel included and to know we belong in our culture, our planet, and our universe. It is not such a big deal to be gay. It's cool. It's part of nature and part of human nature, and represents one beautiful aspect of the blooming, buzzing confusion of creation. Queer people, in most societies considered outsiders, are often the vanguard of fashions and trends, bravely standing at the forefront of culture. Let's take advantage of this role and embrace the psychedelic renaissance, working with plants and chemicals that, without prejudice, mysteriously teach the eternal secrets to whomever asks. Thank you.
Hi. Hello. Hi. Thank you for that. A lot of beautiful information. I'm really interested in how you became interested in ayahuasca initially. Very simple question, but where did the passion come from for you?
I was in therapy with an unlicensed clinician, and I wanted to try some kind of mind-altering substance in therapy, and I was looking up different things that my therapist said that LSD lasted too long, so I was investigating, and I just happened to ask somebody who was at my workplace. I'm going to out CIIS, but he told me that they were his East-West psychology class. This is some years ago, but we're holding an ayahuasca ceremony in the Haight, and so I got myself invited, and I drank it with a bunch of students from CIIS, and none of them liked it, but I was very taken by it, and like a month later I went to Brazil and drank ayahuasca with Santo Daime, and then I traveled around Ecuador and Peru and drank a lot more, and
Yeah, so thank you for giving the presentation. I'm a fan of your work and have read some things that you've written. And one thing that I am interested in is learning more about your work with the Santo Daime, maybe explaining what the Santo Daime is. I mean, I know that's how I became, first was introduced to ayahuasca, through the sacrament of Santo Daime, and it just wasn't for me with the structure and the religion and the Catholicism. So, what was your journey in that, in reconciling that religious dogma with your own gender and sexual identity?
Yeah, I had a long journey with Santo Daime since 1997. And when I started, I mean, it's ayahuasca is very strong, and I will say it tricked me into being a Christian for a little while. And then it was so strong that it tricked me out of being a Christian. So I still attend, and I really like the structure of it. And I'm not trans. I have a trans friend who I think she's dropped out because of it, because it's very divided, men on one side and women on the other, and it's very patriarchal, and there's a lot of things to criticize about it. But for me, it's like my home, my psychedelic home, and I take from it what is useful for me. And I found in my research, in my dissertation, that everybody did that. Everybody, if they hear something that they didn't like in either Santo Daime or with a shaman or whatever, people are having such strong psychedelic experiences that I think they just sort out the parts that don't make sense. Like, if you think about it too hard, your brain will fall apart. So just, like, for me, it was just looking further inward and using logic to figure out what it is I do believe, while still, drinking ayahuasca with Santo Daime. So I have a loyalty to it, and I really like it, but I understand that it is problematical, and it makes me sad that they're not very flexible. The trans person that I know confronted some leaders, and they told them that they should maybe find a different church. So I thought it was a very weak answer. So it's a struggle, but I mean, here in Northern California, it's people that I know, and I don't feel homophobia there at all, and there is still some of the patriarchy, but I just ignore it. So.
I was afraid to get up, but I'm up. Okay, thank you so much. And I guess what really stood out to me, what I'm curious about, you described this process of the taker of ayahuasca going down through layers of consciousness and seeing or maybe reviewing with the observing ego, the levels of defensiveness on the way down to the deeper unconscious, and how that somehow creates an opportunity that is really powerful. Could you talk more about that?
Well, my understanding of that is, I like Buddhism and like non-dual philosophy, so I really relate that to getting past all the words, and to try to get better, to try to heal, I think you have to go down, and then there's where the trauma is, the stuff you've pushed down and pushed away. So then working through that, underneath that is like getting less words and less stories and less, and as you continue to go to the core, then you can have a spiritual awakening, which I've had, which unfortunately doesn't really last outside, but I know it's true. So I know that there's this beautiful core of everyone, and it causes me to have more respect for other people, because everybody has this, and it's just the fight to see if you can access it. So I think many times people say in ayahuasca, the main thing to learn is to surrender. So just continuing to surrender each layer and being more and more open to learning what it is that And the thing is, it's such a fearful experience sometimes to go into that, but actually the answer at the core is like, everything's great and you're great. And so being able to get there and have the courage to do it is the journey.
Can I ask one more? So, the number of ayahuasca sessions, would that be correlated to how defensive I fucking am? Because I did it once and I was not willing to like surrender at all.
You just have to do it more.
Oh my God, I'm fierce.
Hi, thank you. You spent some time talking about the history of psychedelics being used for conversion therapy, and as psychedelics become more normalized, do you anticipate that coming back at all? And if so, how would you respond to it?
Well, I'm hoping that that has died out and that there's just another state, I think it was Colorado, that just recently made conversion therapy illegal. So I think psychology has moved on, and hopefully that will never be the case again, although, I can't say, but it's a misunderstanding of humanity or psychology or something that would make someone want to do that in the first place. So I really hope that doesn't happen, and I haven't seen anything like that. And usually the people who are promoting that kind of conversion therapy are really square Christian type people that aren't going to get their hands on any psychedelics. So I hope it continues like that.
Wanted to make one comment, like sharing that when we organized this conference, so, I come very much from the field of studies of ayahuasca, and that's what I'm known for, Clancy a lot too. And when we put out the call for queering psychedelics, we had a really bad backlash on social media. And D, that just made this question now, she also published an article with us about queer spaces, safe spaces for people to experience psychedelics, and she was pretty trashed, and a lot of bullying and hatred online and ayahuasca groups. So definitely the ayahuasca culture is a kind of subculture that I think is more conservative within the wider psychedelic movement, and that's a lot of the inspiration of this conference too. And we had one of the most famous ayahuasca leaders that is kind of really cherished and respected and has an important pioneering center in Peru that does ayahuasca for treatment of drug-related problems, made a pretty nasty comment saying, LGBTQI, or why don't you add P for pedophilia, and why don't you add Z for zoomorphia, and a few other words that I didn't even know. And a lot of people just saying, why do you gay people isolate yourselves, and this is the religion of intersectionality and segregation and hatred, and that shows us that this conference is necessary and that this work is important. And call me naive or call me, romantic, but I also think we can move this fight with a more loving perspective than some of, the cult culture and the counter discourse to hatred based on hatred is being taken. So we at Chacruna, we are trying to embrace this perspective that we're trying really to teach people, and we sincerely think there's a lot of ignorance, and people need to learn, and you need to tell them and have discussions that are sophisticated and nuanced and loving and caring and inviting to diversity and inviting to people be open to listening and talking. And that's also why we say that it's not just about queer people, it's about everybody. It's about all of us. All of us are welcome. And I think there is a kind of tricky distinction that complexifies everything in the ayahuasca world, because one thing is when you have like this conversion therapies, that it's clearly like outlawed or, you know, maybe in some places not so outlawed, but there is like the DSM and the American Psychiatry Association and all our medical institutions and, you know, safeguards about homosexuality not being a pathology anymore, and so forth. So in the realm of therapy, it kind of has this protection, but when you move it to the realm of religion, it gets tricky because it goes to the realm of like, you know, this is my religious autonomy and this is what I believe, so I believe I can convert people with ayahuasca and make them straight. So that's very complicated. And we've been producing a series of articles about this topic. In Chacruna, we have a session called Queer, where we're challenging this notion of religious conversion of gay people to become straight. And it's a long discussion, but I just want to say it doesn't work.
Hi, Clancy. Can I ask a question? Sorry, I'm here.
Yeah.
Thank you for your interviews with the queer folks about their ayahuasca work. In my clinical practice, I've treated people who are survivors of conversion therapy, but my question is actually about like the opposite, and just to put it in a tongue-in-cheek way, can psychedelics make you gay? But I ask this seriously because I think that we know that sexual identity, gender identity are fluid constructs, right? That they're repressed and pushed down for complex reasons. And there's tons of anecdotal stories of people who identify as straight and realize they have attraction to same-gender people. They realize that they have a more complex understanding of their own gender identifications and their like locations in the world. I recently worked with somebody as part of a clinical trial, and he changes his gender identity, has different pronouns now. Like this work is really fascinating, but no one's really looked at it. And I'm just wondering, like, is there something that is liberating about sexual identity, attraction, behavior, and gender identity that's part of the psychedelic experience and medicine work potentially?
It's true. I also have read many a lot of stuff on the internet of people who, like, can LSD make you gay? If you Google that, you'll find a lot of people who either had like a same-sex experience on LSD or who took LSD and then realized later that during the experience that they really were gay, or that they. So I think it's liberating in many ways, and that's one way that, because our culture is so damning of that identity, that a lot of people, like almost everybody that's gay, has at some point went, oh, like it's a secret right now because I just realized it to myself. And that experience can be forestalled for, like, look at Mike Pence. It's like you can last for many years if they ever realize it. But I think that taking a psychedelic is definitely something that can accelerate any kind of self-knowledge. So it would be a great, like, if anyone were doing, if I was doing my another dissertation, I think that would be a really interesting, like, way to look at it, or thing to look at. And also people who are trans, also I've read a couple of reports of people at conferences I've been at that have realized their trans identity on ayahuasca. So yeah, I think it's a thing, and it's a good thing.
Hello. I really appreciated how you mentioned your interest in protection of ayahuasca, and it sounds like when you started taking the plant medicine that it was maybe back before this trend that's recently happened of like ayahuasca now being turned into this like $2,000 experience, all expense paid. You get the yoga and the whatever. And I'm just curious to know your thoughts. And there's also concurrently, you mentioned how, an increased appreciation of nature, and yet from what I've heard that ayahuasca needs a certain kind of respect for the harvesting of the plant, and now there's like basically destruction of the natural habitat. Is the global, i.e. like more white appetite for it has like increased, for it to be shipped out internationally. So I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are for, actually helping with the protection of the healing practice and tradition, especially for folks who are not from that culture, which actually 99% of us probably are not. So just wanted to hear that. Okay.
Well, I drink mostly in Santo Daime, just because when I say mostly, I've drunk in other traditions, but Santo Daime meets very often, twice a month. And when I went, and it still is true, they don't believe that ayahuasca should be exchanged for money. So in our local church, we just cover expenses and regard selling or buying it as, like, the founder of Santo Daime said that was not to be done, so we don't do that. And the other ayahuasca church from Brazil also doesn't do that, and they also have plantations where they grow the ayahuasca and harvest it, so they're not impacting the wild harvests of it. And I mean, it's like the Wild West. I think people are doing whatever they want until something bad is going to happen, and then authorities will step in and do something awful. So I think having respect for it and making people aware of its the fact that it can be over-harvested, and the fact is it's pretty easy to grow, actually, and there's plantations in Hawaii that supply most of the Santo Daime, most of the ayahuasca, I think, to North America. So there's other currents kind of behind the scenes. Not everyone's getting it from the Amazon. I think education is, the main thing, because we can't really control people from doing whatever it is they're going to do. They have to have the knowledge that what they're doing, if they really are benefiting from ayahuasca, they won't want to harm it. And there's a bunch of irresponsible people who are doing ayahuasca ceremonies now, and that's true. And I don't know what to say about that. There's no, if you call the cops on them, you're calling the cops on everybody. So I guess it makes me sad, but it's something I don't know I don't know what the steps would be except for internal controls and people being made aware of what's going on. Thank you.
Hi. I had a general question about the things that you do, and I wanted to ask everyone, and I was going to ask Eric, but how does your work in science and research sort of come together with your work in art, and how does psychedelics play a role in that?
I guess the research or like writing papers and stuff I do that more because I care about ayahuasca as a practice. And for my art, I was already an artist, but it definitely is a huge inspiration for anybody who makes art. And there's there's this painting style that comes out of Peru that's like Pablo Amaringo, that type of art. And then there's like my art, which is just a weird thing that is, I think everybody could make, if they would try, if you guys would just try to make ayahuasca art, it would all, like, the fact that it gives you visions tells you that it's going to make some cool art. So, I don't know if, I guess that's my clearest answer on that.
Hi, thank you so much for everything you shared. I'm on the board of directors of a small spiritual ministry that does ayahuasca ceremonies regularly, and we're sanctioned by the Aclava Native American Church. And being the only queer member of the board, but everybody's very open, I'm always thinking of ways that it can be even more inclusive, and thinking of how Terence McKenna spoke of the idea of set and setting and how important that is with any kind of plant medicine ceremony, but in this case, ayahuasca. I'm wondering if you've ever hypothesized on what a set and setting might be that would be appropriate for queer people being involved.
I think that, like the indigenous themed ceremonies that I've been to, have just been in a maloka in the dark on a mat, and I think the main thing would be to know that the shaman or the people running the center or the environment that you're in is supportive. I don't think you need to have like a special gay ceremony because, you know, so much of it is just happening inside your own head. You're not really communicating, at least in the ceremonies I've been in, outside of Santo Daime, which is a whole nother ball of wax, but to make that more gay-friendly, they just have to, it's just like the leaders and the people in the environment have to be accepting and encouraging about any kind of sexuality or gender that people who want to drink might have. And I don't think that the actual ritual would change, but just knowing that you could talk about that stuff with somebody the next day or in a group is really important. People that can't share that because they feel like the shaman is homophobic or the group that they're with doesn't want to hear about that, or people feel it's distasteful or whatever, you know, that's obviously not a good place for anyone, I think anyone to drink, but especially for gay people. So just having like the people in charge affirm that they are cool is what I think would make the biggest difference.
Hi, I have a bit of a two-part question. The first thing was just a question about an interpretation I had of something you said in the conversion therapy about Stanislav Grof, and I'm a big fan of his, and I was wondering, I thought the outcome of his work on homosexuals was mostly just people becoming okay with their own identities rather than a conversion therapy thing, but I'd be interested in being corrected about that, number one, if that's the case. And second of all, I'm active in the anti-fascist movement, and I've read some reports of people coming out as Nazis after LSD. So if you might have any reflections on that, I would be curious to hear it, specifically with what we were talking about, shame, because I think maybe the release of shame may be a mechanism there. So if you don't have anything salient to say about it, that's fine, I guess, but it's just something that occurred to me in the context of what we were talking about.
Well, I really like Stan Grof, and I don't mean to say that he's like a conversion therapist. It's just that his work he did pathologize homosexuality. He did say that gay men were put off by vagina dentata, and so that's why they didn't like girls, stuff like that. I know that he's moved on from there, but I'm sorry, I kind of spaced on your second part of your question, which was, and Nazi. So there was actually a cult in Brazil formed, or in Chile, I guess it was, where they sacrificed a newborn baby in an ayahuasca ritual. So things can get out of hand. Things, people, given their own, if there's not like a strong basis of like love for other people or like instruction on like what you're doing this for, I think, I mean, if you look at the history of the UDV, like what they think happened in the past, it's this myth of how ayahuasca came to be given to Master Gabriel. It's a super weird psychedelic story that supposedly, I mean, I'm sorry to offend anyone in the UDV, but it's just a very strange story, and people will come up with strange things, and I think it's like social, like someone would come out and say, you know what, I think I'm a Nazi now, and hopefully other people would say, here, have more to drink, and let's dissuade you of that. But if there's no like social group that like pressures, it's what you come up with, and people look at history. People come up with a lot of crazy ideas. It's not gonna, and this is another thing that, like, the União de Vegetal is a ayahuasca religion from Brazil, and they came out against homosexuality and said that, you know, we are against gay marriage because if we have gay marriage, it could lead to the extinction of the human race. They said that, and I was like, I guess if, you know, it just didn't make any sense at all. So there's like a prominent ayahuasca using group coming up with like a strange, you know, thought thing that I guess they all agreed with, and not all of them actually. There was protests in the United States against it, but you know, it's not guaranteed that if you have a big idea that it's going to be really a good idea.
One more here.
Hi. Hey, Clancy. Nice to see you up there. I wanted to go back to the question that somebody raised around can psychedelics make you gay? And I'm not sure if I have a question or more like a comment, and I'd be interested in your expounding on it. I feel a little bit like we're conflating different terms because gay is not necessarily the same thing as queer. And one of the things that one of the things I personally have experienced is that the psychedelics can do a number of things, and one of the things that they do is they present kind of truth, maybe, or real self, or whatever that might mean. But the other thing that psychedelics do that in some ways, personally, I find even more kind of curious or intriguing is that they blow up categories or make the categories almost like obsolete or not quite even understandable. So I think when I think about queering and psychedelics, I think about almost like the transcendence of sexual identities or orientations as one of the things that can happen. And it doesn't deny or negate the other thing that happens about realness and, oh, this is my real identity, but I just want to offer that I think it's more complex than that.
Yeah, I agree, and in my research, I think there was several people who had said that they had just, like, when I asked them about their gay identity and ayahuasca and stuff, they just said that it's so irrelevant, that those categories don't make sense anymore, and it's just a mask that we're wearing, and so I think you're right, and I think it really is related to the going down deeper and deeper, and as you go deeper, there's less walls and categories, and it's more liberating, so it feels better. Thank you. My wife asked me to sing a Santo Daime song, so I'm going to sing a short one. Chama estrela, chama estrela, chama estrela, estrela vem. Chama estrela, chama estrela, chama estrela, estrela vem. Ela vem me ensinar o amor de quem quer bem. Ela vem me ensinar o amor de quem quer bem. O amor de quem quer bem. E a saúde e o bem-estar. O amor de quem quer bem, e a saúde e o bem-estar, consagrando este amor para sempre não faltar. Consagrando este amor para sempre não faltar. para sempre, amigo do meu irmão, para sempre, amigo do meu irmão, que ele é a minha luz neste mundo de ilusão, que ele é a minha luz neste mundo de